The evening sky over Narathis looked strange to human eyes. The clouds were not gray like Earth storms, but glowing with streaks of green and purple. The air carried a low hum, a warning that the dangerous bioelectric winds would soon sweep across the land. Arian, a human envoy, stood at the edge of the small trading post where he had been waiting for transport. His mission was simple in words but heavy in meaning: meet the Empress of Narathis and negotiate peace. For months, tension had grown between the human settlers and the native empire ruled by the mysterious vampire Empress. Some said she was cruel, others said she was wise, but all agreed she was powerful. Arian pulled his worn cloak tighter around his shoulders. He had faced storms before, but this world's storms were different. They could tear steel apart, and the lightning carried strange colors that burned the air itself. He was warned not to travel during such weather, but his guide never came. He had no choice but to walk the last stretch toward the capital on his own. The wind began to rise, carrying dust that glowed faintly under the storm's strange light. Arian leaned forward, pushing against the gusts. He thought only of reaching the palace walls before the storm became deadly. Then, through the flashing skies, he saw movement. At first, he thought it was an illusion created by the storm. But then the shadow became clear, a tall figure struggling near the ruins of an old tower. Part of the stone structure had collapsed, and the figure was trapped beneath the heavy debris. Arian's instincts shouted at him to keep moving. It was not his problem. His own survival was already at risk. But something stronger than fear took hold of him. He turned and ran toward the ruins. The figure raised a hand as if to warn him away. The lightning illuminated a face pale as moonlight, with sharp features that seemed both elegant and intimidating. Arian froze for a moment. He had seen drawings of her in old records. His heart skipped. It was her, the Empress herself. She did not wear a crown or armor, only a dark robe that was torn by the wind. A broken beam pinned her arm, and the storm whipped around her mercilessly. Arian did not think twice. He dropped his pack, braced his legs, and pushed against the fallen beam. The stone groaned but did not move. He tried again, forcing all his weight against it. The Empress watched silently, her crimson eyes following his every movement. Finally, with one last effort, the beam shifted enough for her to pull free. Arian stumbled back, breathing hard. "You..." Her voice was soft, yet it carried power even through the storm. "A human?" "Yes," Arian replied, raising his voice over the wind. "Envoy from the colony. You're hurt? I do not need your pity," she said sharply. But her tone softened when she noticed his cloak. The storm cut across them with icy lashes, and without hesitation, Arian pulled the cloak from his shoulders and draped it over her. The Empress froze, staring at him as though he had broken a 1,000-year law. No one had ever dared offer her such a simple gesture. "It's only a cloak," Arian said, brushing dust from his hands. "But it will keep the wind off you. We need to move before the storm worsens." For a moment, her pride seemed to wrestle with her curiosity. Then she nodded once. Together they fought their way through the storm, step by step, toward a sheltered arch that still stood near the ruins. Inside the shelter, the wind roared outside but could not reach them. The Empress held the cloak tightly around her, her sharp eyes never leaving the human before her. "You knew who I was?" she said at last. "Yes," Arian admitted. "Your likeness is carved on every gate and every coin. Hard not to recognize you. And yet you approached me without fear." Arian gave a tired smile. "Fear was there, but leaving someone to die in a storm? I couldn't do that." The Empress tilted her head, studying him as though he were a puzzle. She had seen humans before, but most bowed, trembled, or avoided her gaze. This one stood before her covered in dust, his clothes torn but his eyes steady. "What is your name?" she asked. "Arian. And you are..." "Well, I don't think I need to ask." The faintest curve touched her lips. "Indeed. You may call me Empress." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the storm's fury. Strange lights flashed across the sky, painting the ruins in colors that seemed almost alive. "You risked much to save me," she said quietly. "You could have walked away." "I thought about it," Arian admitted honestly. "But something told me I'd regret it for the rest of my life if I did." Her eyes glimmered in the strange light. "You speak boldly for one so fragile." "Fragile doesn't mean useless," Arian said, surprising even himself with the firmness of his words. The Empress studied him for a long time. She was used to warriors kneeling, nobles flattering, and rivals plotting, but this human had no reason to save her, no hope of reward and no fear in offering her his own cloak. At last she said, "The storm will pass soon. When it does, you will come with me to the palace." Arian hesitated. "I was heading there anyway. My mission is to speak with you." "Then fate has already spoken," she said, her eyes glowing faintly. "Perhaps this night will be remembered." Outside, the storm began to ease. The winds slowed and the strange lights faded into the distance. But inside the ruined arch, something else had begun. A spark of curiosity, a bond neither of them had expected. Arian tightened the straps on his pack, preparing to follow her. The Empress adjusted the cloak around her shoulders, still testing its warmth, still wondering why a human would do such a thing. As they stepped out into the calm after the storm, the land looked different, washed clean by the lightning and rain. The road to the palace stretched before them, and so began a night that would change not only the fate of one man and one empress, but the destiny of a whole planet. The storm had passed, but the memory of it lingered. The air was sharp and cool, carrying the faint scent of charged dust. Arian walked beside the Empress, though he kept a respectful distance. He had not planned for this meeting. He had imagined stepping into her throne room as an envoy, speaking with careful words, surrounded by guards and watching eyes. Instead, he found himself walking through the broken remains of a ruined tower, side by side with the ruler of Narathis herself. The Empress moved with quiet grace, even though she still wore his weathered cloak. The dark fabric looked strange against her pale form, but she did not seem bothered by it. Her eyes flicked toward him now and then, as if she were studying not just his face but his soul. Arian kept his gaze on the road ahead. He could feel the weight of her presence without even looking. The humans on Narathis often told stories about her. Some called her a tyrant, some a goddess, others a mystery wrapped in fear. To Arian, she was simply a woman who had nearly been crushed in a storm. That thought steadied him. As they reached the edge of the ruined lands, a group of armored figures appeared. Their armor gleamed red and silver, and their weapons glowed faintly with stored energy. They dropped to one knee in perfect unison. "Empress," the leader said, his voice filled with concern. "We feared the storm had taken you." The Empress lifted her hand lightly. "I am unharmed." Her voice carried power, calm but commanding. Their eyes darted toward Arian, confusion plain on their faces. He was dusty, his boots muddy, and he carried nothing but a small pack. Yet the Empress wore his cloak. That single detail shocked the guards more than anything. "This human," the leader began. The Empress's gaze silenced him. "He is under my protection. He walks with me." The guards lowered their heads, not daring to question further. Arian felt the weight of their stares but said nothing. They continued toward the capital. The palace city of Narathis rose ahead, its towers glittering like black crystal in the moonlight. Streams of glowing liquid energy ran through the streets like rivers, feeding strange plants that pulsed with light. The whole city seemed alive, breathing, watching. Arian tried not to gape. He had read reports, seen drawings, but nothing compared to standing before it. This was not a place built by human hands. It felt ancient, as if it had grown from the very bones of the world. At the palace gates, the Empress gave a simple order. "Prepare chambers for the envoy." The guards obeyed instantly. Arian was guided through halls filled with wonders. Walls carved with flowing patterns that shifted when light touched them, floors that glowed faintly underfoot, statues that seemed almost ready to move. Everywhere he looked, the architecture whispered of power and patience. Finally, he was left in a chamber large enough to fit an entire human house. Curtains of red silk framed tall windows, and a soft bed stood in the center, covered in silver cloth. Servants offered food and water, but no one dared speak more than a few words. Arian sat on the edge of the bed, trying to gather his thoughts. He had planned for formal talks, carefully worded messages, and guarded negotiations. Instead, he had walked through a storm with the Empress, given her his cloak, and now rested in her palace. Before sleep could take him, a messenger arrived. "The Empress requests your presence in the Crimson Gardens." Arian followed, uncertain of what waited ahead. The gardens were said to be forbidden to most, a place only for the Empress and her chosen. He walked through winding halls until tall doors opened to reveal a sight unlike any other. The Crimson Gardens glowed under the night sky. Strange trees with red crystal leaves shimmered. and flowers that looked like stars floated in the air. Streams of glowing water wound through the paths, and small creatures with translucent wings danced a blossom. The palace of Nerathis was a world of wonders, but Arian soon learned that its greatest secret lay far beneath its shining halls. Days after his strange walk in the Crimson Gardens, the Empress summoned him again. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried weight as though she had decided something important. "You showed honesty in the gardens," she said, "and courage in the storm. Now you will see something no envoy has seen before." Arian felt his chest tighten. "Something forbidden?" "Forbidden to most," she replied, "but not to you. Come." He followed her through a hidden passage behind the throne room. The walls were not carved stone but smooth black crystal, pulsing faintly with light. The air grew warmer the deeper they walked, as if the palace itself breathed. At last, the passage opened into a vast chamber. Arian stopped in awe. Before him lay the pulse core. It was not a machine in the way humans built machines. It looked alive, a massive sphere of glowing energy suspended in midair. Veins of crimson and silver light pulsed across its surface, spreading into the walls like roots or arteries. Each pulse sent a gentle tremor through the chamber, as if the planet's heart had spoken. "This," Arian whispered. "It's alive." The Empress stepped closer, her robe brushing against the glowing floor. "The pulse core is the heart of Nerathis. It shapes the climate, feeds the rivers, guides the winds. Without it, this world would wither." Arian swallowed. "And you control it?" "I guard it," she corrected. "Control is an illusion. One can only guide, and only with care." She placed her pale hand against the glowing light. Instantly, the chamber responded. The pulses grew steadier, the air warmer. Her presence soothed it as though it recognized her. Arian stared in silence. He was an envoy, a man of reason, yet what he saw before him was beyond reason. A living core that carried the fate of an entire planet. No wonder her people obeyed her. No wonder humans whispered her name in fear. But something troubled him. The pulses did not look steady. Now and then, a jagged flicker broke the rhythm like a skipped heartbeat. "Is it supposed to do that?" he asked. The Empress's eyes narrowed. "You see it." "I may not understand it," Arian admitted, "but I know when something isn't working right." She walked slowly around the core. For months, it has grown restless. Some believe it is the planet's cycle. Others, her voice hardened. Others would see it fail to take power for themselves. Arian frowned. "Sabotage?" She did not answer directly, but the silence was enough. He studied the glowing patterns on the walls. They looked almost like circuits, but more organic, as if nature and design had become one. If someone wanted to damage it, how would they do it? The Empress gave him a sharp look. "Why do you ask such things?" "Because if I can see the weakness, then so can they," Arian said. "Better to know than ignore it." Her eyes lingered on him, weighing his words. Finally, she gestured toward a cluster of crystals at the base of the core. "That is where the flow enters the palace. If corrupted, the whole system could falter." Arian knelt to examine the crystals. At first, he saw only glowing patterns. But then, hidden among them, he noticed something unnatural, a faint black residue clinging to the edges. He touched it with care. It was oily, wrong, almost like ash. "This isn't part of it, is it?" he asked. The Empress's expression darkened. "No, it should not be here." "Then someone placed it," Arian said quietly. Her silence confirmed it. Arian stood, brushing his hands. "If this continues, what happens?" "The pulses will weaken," she said, her voice low. "Storms will grow wild, rivers will dry, and the land will crack. My rule depends not on armies, but on the core. If it falters, so does Nerathis." Arian felt the weight of her words. A plot against her was not just politics, it was the risk of a world collapsing. "Do you know who is behind it?" he asked. Her gaze turned sharp, distant. "I have suspicions. But proof is another matter." Arian nodded slowly. "Then maybe I can help." She turned on him, surprised. "You a human envoy?" "I'm not a warrior," Arian admitted. "But humans are good at puzzles. At fixing things others overlook. Let me study this residue. Maybe I can trace it." For a moment, the Empress looked at him as though deciding his fate. Then she said softly, "Very well, but you will act in secret. If my court knows I have trusted a human with this, they will see weakness. And weakness draws blood." Arian bowed his head. "Understood." That night, back in his chamber, Arian examined the black residue under a small human scanner he carried. The device flickered with confused readings. It wasn't like any known element, but he noticed patterns, faint traces of energy that did not belong to the core. Whoever had planted it wanted the damage to look natural. But to Arian, it looked deliberate. The next day, he walked the palace halls more carefully. Servants bowed, nobles whispered, and guards watched him with suspicion. He noticed how some figures lingered near the hidden passages, their eyes sharp, their movements careful. The Empress summoned him again in private. "Well?" she asked. "It's sabotage," Arian confirmed. "But clever. They're trying to hide it as decay." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I was right to show you." "Do you have enemies inside your court?" he asked. Her crimson eyes glimmered. "In my palace, everyone is either ally or rival. Even loyalty can change with the wind," Arian thought for a moment. "Then they'll strike again, and when they do, we'll be ready." Later, as he walked alone through the glowing halls, he felt the eyes of the palace on him. The pulse core's heartbeat echoed faintly through the walls, steady but strained. He realized the Empress lived each day with this burden, not just ruling her people, but keeping the planet alive. And now, by giving her a cloak in a storm, he had stepped into a game far larger than diplomacy. Arian paused at a window overlooking the city. The rivers of light flowed calmly. The towers gleamed and people moved below, unaware that their lives hung on a fragile pulse. He whispered to himself, "If the core fails, everything fails." Behind him, footsteps echoed softly. He turned, half expecting a guard. Instead, it was the Empress herself. "You see it now," she said quietly. "The truth of this place." Arian nodded. "Yes, and I'll help however I can." She studied him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then almost gently she said, "Perhaps fate was not so cruel to throw us into the storm together." The chamber lights pulsed brighter, as if agreeing, and Arian realized he was no longer just an envoy. He was part of the Empress's most guarded secret, one that could decide the future of an entire planet. Word count: 1110. The city of Valinor woke to a strange silence. No merchants shouted in the streets. No carriages rattled on the stones. No bells rang from the towers. People stood at windows and doors, whispering to one another. For everyone had seen the same thing the night before. The vampire Empress walking through the storm, wearing the cloak of a human. Some called it a trick. Others said it was a sign. But one truth spread quickly. The Empress had been seen beside Marcus, the wandering human. Inside the royal palace, the vampire Empress sat on her throne. Her cloak of shadows was gone. Instead, she wore Marcus's heavy wool cloak draped across her shoulders. It looked strange on her, plain and simple, but she refused to take it off. Her advisors stood in a half-circle around her. They whispered warnings. "You must return to tradition," said one lord. "Your image of power is everything. Remove that cloth. Do not let the humans think you are weak," said another. "They will rise against us if they sense doubt." But the Empress lifted her hand. "Enough. For centuries I have ruled through fear, and yet fear has brought us nothing but endless storms. Perhaps it is time the world saw me differently." Her words shocked the court. For the first time in living memory, the Empress sounded less like a queen of shadows and more like a woman seeking light. Marcus stood quietly at the side of the throne room. He felt out of place. He had been nothing more than a traveler, and yet now the eyes of nobles and soldiers were on him. The Empress turned to him. "Marcus, walk with me." They left the hall and climbed the long stairway that led to the highest balcony of the palace. From there, they could see the whole city, its towers, its winding streets, and beyond, the storm clouds still circling the horizon. "Tell me what you see," she said. Marcus looked at the city below. "I see people who are afraid," he said simply. "But I also see people who hope." They whisper to each other, waiting to see what you will do next. They don't want fear anymore. They want a reason to believe. The Empress studied him. "And you think I can give them that?" "You already did," Marcus replied. "When you walked through the storm in my cloak, they saw you as more than a ruler of shadows. They saw you as someone willing to step into the storm with them." For a moment, the Empress was silent. Her red eyes softened, and Marcus realized that beneath her power there was a heart that had carried centuries of loneliness. That night, the Empress called for something that had never been done before. She ordered the great bell of Valinor to ring, not for war, not for judgment, but for gathering. The sound echoed across the land, and thousands of people came to the central square, filling the streets until no more could fit. Torches lit the night, and the people looked up to the palace balcony. The Empress stepped forward, her black hair flowing in the wind, Marcus's cloak still wrapped around her. A hush fell over the crowd. For centuries, no human or vampire had heard the Empress speak directly to them. Her voice carried strong air. People of Valinor. Foray. The morning after the Empress's speech, the city of Valinor seemed brighter, yet tension hung in the air. The streets were filled with whispers, not just of awe and hope, but of anger and fear. Some nobles and courtiers had already begun plotting, unwilling to accept a ruler who chose kindness over fear. Marcus walked through the palace corridors with purpose. The Empress had asked him to help uncover the conspirators who wished to sabotage the Pulse Core and disrupt the peace she had promised. He had studied the black residue, traced it to hidden passages beneath the palace, and noticed patterns that pointed to several high-ranking courtiers. But he knew it would not be enough to simply expose them. They were clever, powerful, and dangerous. The Empress approached him quietly as he examined a map of the palace. "What have you found?" she asked, her crimson eyes searching his face. "Not everyone is loyal," Marcus said bluntly. "Some want the Pulse Core to fail. They think if the world suffers, they will gain more power." The Empress's lips pressed together. "And these people are—" "I've traced the residue," Marcus said, pointing at the map, "to hidden tunnels under the East Wing. Whoever planted it knows the core's energy flows. If they act again, it will be catastrophic." Her expression hardened. "Then we act first. We cannot wait for them to strike." That night, Marcus joined the Empress in the Pulse Core chamber. The air pulsed gently, a heartbeat of the planet itself. The core glowed brighter as the Empress approached. "You understand the risk?" she asked. "If we fail tonight, we may lose more than the core. We may lose the people's trust forever." Marcus nodded. "I know, but I've never been one to stand aside when something can be fixed. We can stop them if we act carefully." She studied him for a long moment. "You are not like the humans I have met before. You do not bow to fear. That may save us." Together they moved through the hidden passages Marcus had mapped. The tunnels were narrow and dark, but small lights from the walls revealed glowing veins of energy, pulses from the core itself, feeding the palace above. Suddenly, a shadow moved ahead. Marcus signaled to stop. They crouched behind a thick stone wall. Two figures emerged, cloaked in black, carrying small devices that glowed faintly. They approached the central vein of the core, carefully placing their sabotage. "The residue," Marcus whispered. "It's them." "We caught them in the act." The Empress stepped forward. Her presence was like a wave, and the shadows froze. "Stop," she commanded. Her voice carried an authority that vibrated through the tunnel. The saboteurs turned, startled. "Empress," one shouted, realizing they had been discovered. "You will harm no one," she said. "And you will tell me why you tried." The two conspirators hesitated. Their eyes flicked to Marcus, who stood beside the Empress. The human did not flinch, did not retreat. The sight of him seemed to strengthen her authority. Finally, one of the conspirators knelt. We acted to protect the Empire. We believed your change would weaken Narathis. We feared the humans would take control." The Empress's gaze did not soften, but it did not strike either. "Fear is a poor guide," she said, "and treachery even worse. You will be judged, but the core remains unharmed thanks to your hesitation." Marcus stepped closer. "If you wanted to protect the Empire, you should have asked questions, not sabotaged it. The core is part of the planet. Destroy it and the Empire dies with it." The conspirators lowered their heads. Their plan had failed and they knew it. By the next morning, the palace was alert, but the city had already begun to notice changes. The rivers of glowing energy that flowed through the streets pulsed brighter, and the gardens that once wilted under fear now glimmered with life. The Empress and Marcus stood on the palace balcony, looking over the city. "You see this?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "They trust you now, or at least they hope." "I have walked through storms, faced betrayal, and discovered loyalty in unexpected places," she said. "This human cloak, this small act of kindness, it changed how I see the world, and perhaps it can change how others see it too." Marcus smiled faintly. It already has. But the Empress's eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon. Not all have seen it that way, she murmured. The old order will not accept peace so easily. We must be ready for them. Days passed and Marcus trained with the Empress's forces, helping them prepare for possible attacks. Humans were not soldiers in her world, but Marcus's strategies were unusual and effective. He thought quickly, used terrain and timing, and taught them to act without fear. When the first group of rebels tried to disrupt the city's energy flows again, Marcus and the Empress were ready. With her power and his guidance, they intercepted the saboteurs, not with violence, but by clever traps and misdirection. The rebels were caught, and the city watched in awe. Humans and vampires alike began to understand that courage, intelligence, and cooperation could triumph over fear and secrecy. The Empress turned to Marcus afterward. You see, humans have a way of solving problems that my court has forgotten. They think, adapt, and act without arrogance. Perhaps that is why I am drawn to you. Marcus felt his face warm, but he only said, We all do what we can to help. That's all. Her eyes softened. It is more than that. It is a bond of trust, and it may be the bond that saves this empire. That night, as the stars shone above Valinor, Marcus and the Empress walked in the Crimson Gardens once more. The gardens had grown brighter, the plants more alive, as if reflecting the change in the city itself. You have changed more than just my view of humans, the Empress said. You have reminded me that leadership is not only power, but responsibility. Not only fear, but care. Marcus looked around at the glowing streams and floating flowers. It's beautiful. And it belongs to everyone. Maybe that's the lesson too, not just for rulers but for people. She smiled faintly. Yes, and yet the night is not over. The world beyond Valinor watches. They may not understand, but they will learn. Marcus knew she was right. The rebellion was not fully ended. Shadowy figures still whispered, still plotted, still hoped to regain control through fear. But for the first time in centuries, the Empress had shown that courage, trust, and kindness could hold more power than hatred. As they returned to the palace, Marcus thought of the storm that had brought them together. The cloak he had offered without thought and the bond it had created. One small act had changed a night. That night had changed a city. And the city, he realized, could one day change a planet. The Empress paused before entering her private chambers. Marcus, she said softly, stay close. The future may demand it, and I will need your mind, your courage, and perhaps your heart. Marcus looked at her, unsure how to reply. He had never imagined he would be part of shaping an entire world, let alone be trusted by a ruler whose very presence inspired fear. But one thing he knew, he would stand beside her, whatever came next. And somewhere in the shadows the rebels waited, unaware that the storm had already begun to turn against them. The dawn on Nerathis was gentle, unlike any sunrise Marcus had ever seen. The sky glowed with soft streaks of pink and gold, and the city of Valinor shimmered in the morning light. The pulse core's energy flowed steadily through the palace, its heartbeat calm and strong. For the first time in centuries, the people of Nerathis could breathe without fear of storms or destruction. Marcus walked beside the Empress on the balcony overlooking the city. The cloak he had given her long ago now felt like a symbol of courage, of trust, and of change. He looked at her, standing tall and regal, yet not distant. She was the same vampire Empress of legend, but now she ruled with understanding rather than fear. The city feels different today, Marcus said. Yes, the Empress replied. It is no longer just my people, but our people. Humans and vampires working together, learning together. This is the start of something greater. Marcus nodded. It feels like the storm is really over. For now. The Empress glanced at him, her red eyes softening. You helped me see what the world could be. Without you, I may have remained a ruler of shadows, ruling through fear. But you reminded me. Courage and care can be stronger than power alone. Marcus shook his head. It was just a cloak. That's all. You underestimate yourself, she said gently. Sometimes the smallest acts carry the greatest weight. You carried a small warmth into the storm, and it grew into something that changed not just me, but the planet. Word of the night's events spread quickly through Valinor. Humans and vampires alike spoke of the Empress who had walked through a storm with a human, of the pulse core that had been nearly sabotaged, and of the courage that had stopped it. People began to work together, repairing the city's energy lines, planting gardens, and teaching one another. Even those who had once plotted against the Empress found themselves slowly yielding. Fear no longer ruled their hearts. Instead, curiosity and hope replaced suspicion. The rebels who had once moved in secret were now brought before the Empress, and rather than punishment alone, they were given choice: loyalty to the world or exile. Many chose to serve, inspired by the courage they had witnessed. Marcus walked through the city, witnessing people of all kinds working together. Children of humans and vampires laughed in the streets. Merchants shared supplies with neighbors who had once been strangers. The energy of Narathis itself seemed to hum with life, no longer strained by fear or distrust. He returned to the palace and found the the pulse core,